The journaling question is really, what is your biggest fear if you dropped both your internal critic and your external critic? So this judgment part of us, what is the fear in you if we let that go? So if you start writing about that, I'll put it in the chat. So what is your biggest fear if you dropped both your internal critic and your external critic, that judgmental part of your mind? What would go wrong in your life? What might be the problems in relationships? What might you struggle with if you didn't have that? Tough question, yeah. So, some examples of what people worry about often that comes up when we do this is people worry that if we drop this, we might not achieve as much, we might not be as good in quality. There can be another side of it where people worry about losing control, in some way, emotionally or socially or mentally losing control without this. Actually, there can be another side where people worry about success and achievement. Actually, will be more successful, and we're just self-sabotaging a bit with it or something like that. There can be all kinds of subtle fears of dropping this part of you. Being more vulnerable, more weak, can be another fear. So just inquire into yourself. Imagine that critical part of you that is judgmental and harsh, either to yourself or others. And if that was gone, what's the fear? What could happen in your life? Be a simple answer, or it might have layers to it as you dig into it. And it might be one to just sit with and think about. If it's a tough question, that might mean that the answer is not forthcoming, or it's subtle, or actually our mind can resist looking at this. It doesn't want to drop this part. So it can be fearful even looking at it. What could go wrong if we didn't have the critic? We'll move on from there. So that's, something I invite you to think about and reflect on today. If you didn't have this internal critic, giving you a hard time, what's the fear? What would you worry would happen in your life? The quote today is a quote I really like from the brilliant researcher Brene Brown, who her specialist subject is shame and vulnerability and social science research. And she's great. I'm sure many of you have seen her TED talk and heard her talk, and she's a wonderful, interesting, open and authentic person. And she said, if we can share our story with someone who responds with empathy and understanding, shame can't survive. So if we can share our story with someone who responds with empathy and understanding, then shame can't survive. And, I love this. I think this is such an important part of the present of our presence, the theme for this week, how we are authentically there and connected and empathic and validating to those we love and care about. And this brought the topic to my mind today of non-judgment, which is something we've looked at a lot in the context of mindfulness and this curious, non-judgmental attention, this open, accepting quality of attention that is so useful in our lives. And we can bring this into relationships. So what I wanted to say first was that when we talk about non-judgment, we're not talking about not having factual discernment or factual description or critical thinking. It's not that part. It's the excessive amplification of judgment. So rather than saying, when this person does this behavior that is causing problems, it's going, when that idiot goes and treats me like this, and amplify that with appropriate swearing and everything else. That's what we're talking about. It's the elevated, harsh judgment, not factual discernment, not looking around your life and seeing what's right and wrong and what's working or not in respect to your goals and your values. It's that harsh second level thinking. And this is something we all do. It's very human. It's part of our evolved nature, living in groups, but it can get amplified and turned on, and then it has some issues. But before we look at the issues, just looking at the payoffs. So why do we do this? There are a number of payoffs. I think one is primarily often it's a defense mechanism. So it protects us against our own vulnerability, the parts of ourselves we don't like. And it kind of makes us feel stronger sometimes. You think if you go into a party where you feel very anxious and nervous, and then you switch on that part of your brain and you start looking at everyone and judging people and saying, that person's dressed like an idiot and that person's behaving like an idiot. And again, amplify that with appropriate words. We feel kind of stronger. We feel puffed up. We feel more dominant. And then so it gives you a kind of power. So there's that part of it. But the problem, there are costs to that power. So, we'll look at those costs in a moment. It also can be an extension of our own internal critics. So we can extend it to those around us. If we're very harsh on ourselves, then we can be harsh on others because we're trying to motivate and get us to do better. It's the old donkey metaphor of we're using the stick to get the donkey to move rather than the carrot. And if we do that inside, we'll often do that outside. It can be part of feeling actually depressed and low. We can get very irritable and critical, and that can be part of that as well. It can be our negativity bias coming up in social networks, that we're just starting to tune in to what's wrong, and we're seeing more of it because our attention's going there and it's growing because of that. Our kind of threat-based system. So we're looking for threats and social threats, and then we're amplifying that. And really, it's also pushing away weaknesses that we feel in ourselves. We're judging others because we see our shadow in them. We're seeing things we don't like, and we want to push that away and not feel that. And there's more, but they're some of the ideas. So they're the payoffs that keep it going. But the costs are, one that I think relevant to our topic today is that people really pick this up. So people see it in your face, they see it in your micro emotions. You can kind of tell when you're around someone who's judging you, you kind of feel uncomfortable. You can see it in their face. Whereas you compare that to when you're around someone who's validating and empathic and gives you the benefit of the doubt, and is kind in the way they're seeing your behavior and taking your perspective. You just feel it. You feel great, right? You feel kind of relaxed and calm, and you can see it in your heart rate variability, your blood pressure, your cortisol markers, your cardiac function. All of that improves. Even our brain waves start to synchronize when you look at it in a brain scanner. So it just it feels lovely. So if we can drop it, we're going to help people feel more safe, and then consequently we're going to feel more safe because it'll be reflected back to us. Also, we can see clearly the facts without this bias of this negative lens. So we're not so clouded with this harsh judgment. We can see actually what's going on and what's important there. It just feels better. Judgment kind of, it's like scratching an itch. It helps a little bit to puff us up and feel strong, but normally over time it doesn't feel great because we are at our best when we're socially connected and feeling empathy and compassion and support. And the other part, and there's more to it than this, but the other part is that external critic will soon turn back on us. If it's going on out on others, it's not long before it turns back on us. And this is okay in small doses, and it will motivate behavior at times and motivate change. But in large doses over a long time, it's going to be a huge factor in depression and anxiety, actually, and other difficulties and stress and burnout and this kind of thing. So there's a lot of costs to it and a lot of reasons to reduce this. We're never going to get rid of it completely. I don't think. It's part of our mind, but we can change how much we feed it and amplify it and lean into it. And the key thing here is to notice it, by doing that, observe it, step back, and not add in all that second order thinking. So we have two types of thoughts. We have thoughts and we have thinking. Thoughts are automatic, they pop up, nothing we can do about that. Thinking is the bit when we join in and we analyze and we ruminate and we obsess and we check and we review and we judge and judge and judge. So that part is the bit we can drop. We learn to do that with mindfulness by observing that part, letting it go, and choosing where we focus. So we'll do a quick practice just to do some of that now. So sitting comfortably and closing your eyes, and maybe just taking 3 deep breaths to settle in. And then thinking back to a time recently where your own judgment was triggered, someone let you down or annoyed you or irritated you, and you could feel yourself starting to judge them. So not just appraise the facts and assertively say what was wrong, you actually were starting to amplify that into this harsh judgment. So what was that person doing? How did they neglect you and your needs? What were they doing that irritated you? And sometimes even just thinking about this will start the judgment. It will start it going again. Not always. Sometimes it's so distant that it's a distant memory. So whatever that triggers, if it does trigger that judgment, just start to observe it. Start to notice your mind doing that. Watch your mind like a radio station. Watch it starting to do the judgment. If it's not triggering that, just observe what your mind does in response to this. And it might be that it goes still, so just notice that. It might be that it just kind of is making sense of what we're talking about here. It might be jumping around and thinking about the day and other things, whatever's happening. So either it'll be the judgment get started or some other thinking process. Just observe whatever that is, notice it. And whenever you get pulled into it, step back again and start to observe it. And that can be very hard to do. So we can add in a label. We can start to just say judgment. So we can say, okay, there's my mind judging. There's my mind judging or thinking. So we can notice a name. We can do a longer label like naming the story. So we can say, here's the everyone is terrible story, or here's the everyone lets me down story. Or here's the I'm not enough story if it's self-judgment. So we name the story. And then the key thing is we then refocus back into relationships. So you notice and observe and then refocus, or you notice and name and then refocus. So imagine refocusing onto that person now and just thinking about actually their needs, what was going on for them below their behavior, take their perspective for a moment. Why were they behaving in this way that triggered judgment? What was their challenge? And notice if your mind still goes to judgment, and then come back to this perspective taking and refocus on that. We'll just spend a moment doing this. So you notice the judgment, you observe the judgment, then you refocus back. And this in your life could be refocusing back into the moment, into what's actually going on, the facts of what's happening, and bringing in compassion. What kind words can you say to yourself to validate yourself and to the other person? How can you bring some kindness that's going to be more effective than this harsh judgment? We can still challenge, we can still be assertive. However, to do it from this place of compassion and kindness will be more effective in making change. So just spend a moment or two more just thinking about that person and their perspective and what's going on in their life that was triggering this. And then just coming back to the feeling of sitting on the chair, that grounded feeling of your feet on the floor, contact with the chair, spine upright, grounded in your body. And then the challenge today, as you open your eyes now, the challenge today is to try and bring this into your day. So, to say it again, we're not going to get rid of judgment. Our mind's going to do that. We have that automatic thinking level. It's going to do some level of this, but we have a choice. We have that automatic thought level. We have a choice of the thinking level of how much we jump on board and feed and fuel the excessive critic. And we can pull back, notice and name it, and then refocus either into what we're doing or with the person and actually what's going on and making sense of it. And we'll never get it perfect. I would never pretend I do this all the time myself and that my mind doesn't do this, but I have found a lot of benefit working on this, trying to unhook from this judgment strengthens your relationships. People feel safer, people feel more comfortable around you, and it just feels nicer actually. And you can still be assertive, you can still have critical thinking, you can still do factual discernment and appraisal of what's going on. It's not like you lose that, you never lose that. But we're just a little less harsh in our mind. So, play with this today, give this a go, see how it is for you, see what happens in your relationships when you do this, see what happens in your own happiness and well-being. And, if it works, keep doing it. If it doesn't, you can always go back to judging and we'll never get rid of it completely anyway. But give it a shot today and see how you go.